all sorts of things in the book as a whole really fit with this vision of the integrated cosmos, of God's plan for heaven plus earth being fulfilled in Christ. It's part of what we mean, I think, when we say that Christ is both human and divine, that those are loose labels to say he is the one who unites all things in heaven and earth in himself. And then the point of being a Christian is not to escape earth and go to heaven. And people have often misread the passages in Ephesians 1 and 2 about already seated in heavenly places in Christ, as though we have basically left earth and we're just upstairs somewhere, just sloshing around down here, but never mind, it's not important. And then they wonder why, in the last chapter of the book, Paul talks about joining in the spiritual warfare in heavenly places. And the answer is, heaven is where the real warfare is taking place. Christians from that day to this have found it easy to imagine that the real warfare is me versus my enemies, my political enemies, my social enemies, or whatever. And just like Jesus, who says, don't be afraid of this lot, be afraid of the one who can do this and that. So Paul says the real battle is the one going on in the heavenly places. This is cognate with what you find in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says he must reign, that's Christ must reign, till he's put all his enemies under his feet. In other words, we are living in a period of history between the initial victory of Jesus over sin and death in the cross and resurrection and ascension, and the final victory when he comes again and, as Paul says, God will be all in all. And Ephesians addresses the situation of people who are in the middle of that sequence. And so what you have in chapter 1 is the coming together of all things in heaven and earth. And then in chapter 2, once he's explained, just in case anyone was unsure, about how all people are sinful and all need to be redeemed in Christ, then the real punch of chapter 2 is that the unity of believing Judean and believing Gentile in Christ is the kind of instantiation in the present world of that unity of heaven and earth. Because the coming together of heaven and earth is the temple theme in the Old and New Testaments. And at the end of chapter 2, with a glorious climax, Paul says, therefore, you believers, whether Jew or Gentile, you are united by the Spirit indwelling you to become a holy temple in the Lord. And so the indwelling of the Spirit in the church is the new temple motif, with the glory of God coming to dwell in the church. Now, again, most of us never heard any of this growing up. We kind of assumed that the real message was Ephesians 2, 1-10, by grace you are saved through faith, and you've got to do some good works en route, but that the main thing is grace and faith. Well, of course the main thing is grace and faith, but the result of that is the creation of a people who are called to be the small working model of new creation. And that's really the theme tune of my whole exposition here, that the church is called to live as the people in whom the unity of heaven and earth is becoming shakily and no doubt fitfully visible, so that chapter 3, verse 10, the principalities and powers are called to account, because Caesar would love to have created an empire in which all nations and races came together. Caesar could never do it. There was always the elite and the others and the slaves and the women and blah, blah, blah. And for Paul, it's very clear, in Christ, you are all one. And so then in chapter 4 and 5, it's very clear, if this is so, you've got to live as a single body, and the unity of the church and the holiness of the church are the absolutely vital elements in chapters 4 and 5. Most Protestant Christians haven't bothered about unity because they've already split off from something and are liable to make more splits and more splits because that's what we've done. And we're not so bothered about holiness because we believe in justification by grace through faith. So holiness doesn't really matter that much, does it? And Paul would say, too right it does. And so holiness and unity are ways in which the church is called to live as the heaven plus earth people. And then this plays out in terms of different societal roles, and gloriously, climactically in chapter 5, in the coming together of husband and wife in marriage. And obviously, there's all sorts of issues around that, and that's become a hot topic for various, often wrong reasons in our own day. But for Paul, the coming together of heaven and earth, the coming together of Judean and Gentile, the coming together of male and female, boy, this is all about God's purpose in creation and for new creation. And therefore, that explains why there's a battle and why we're in the middle of it in chapter 6. Now, how long did that take? About 7 minutes? I think that's probably as quick as I could do it.